Hello there. Hi, my name is Nick Scorello, and I've been in the games industry for quite some time. I've worked for companies like Sony Online Entertainment before in the past and Electronic Arts. And I've moved into teaching. I currently teach at the University of Central Florida, but I'm kind of taking a new direction with all the different art forms that I know how to do and that I've kind of learned over the years. I'm kind of really interested right now in a couple different things. I'm still interested in games. Games is a lot of fun. I'm actually probably a little bit more interested in virtual reality and doing VR content. And then the other thing that I'm really interested in is making 3D content. I've done jobs as a character artist many years, and that skill set I've really found is kind of rewarding to translate that into the real world and being able to start 3D printing. There's been some advances lately. I'm sure a lot of people out there, if you're watching this video, you're probably interested in some of these topics anyways. So you already know that 3D printing is starting to be more widely available and more accessible to people. So what I would like to do is combine my love for like character art and start making this stuff, and I wouldn't say build a toy line, but I would like to at least start doing some things that I feel is leading me in a direction for building my own toy. I'm kind of latched onto this idea that you can see right now on the screen, and what I usually do for characters is when I first start off, I like to make what I consider as like the naked version of that character, and I want to learn everything about the anatomy and the structure and the rhythm and the kind of the flow of the character. And so I'm kind of working through that right now. And as I work through that, I've been doing some prototype printing. So I bought myself an Elegoo Mars 3D printer. I know the Saturn just came out, and that's really exciting, and I would like to definitely pick that up in the future, but I'm still trying to figure out everything I need to do to actually work with the Mars. So don't really feel like I'm quite ready for the Saturn just yet. I've purchased the Elegoo water washable resin, and I've been using that a lot, and I really like the look of it. I like the way that the material turns out at the end. I've done a lot of printing tests with things. I've had a lot of failures for sure. So the one thing that's maybe a little bit difficult, I guess, for me for the 3D printing is I really wish it was maybe a little bit more simple. It's not that complicated that most people can't get a hold of it and start learning how to use the tools. It's just there's a pretty big learning curve for how you set up your support structures and things like that, right? And for me as the artist, like I'm spending a lot of time inside a ZBrush and I sculpt all these details, and I'm really super happy with the model, and I want all that detail that I've sculpted to be printed out. And with the support structures, the way that it currently works is that the support structures can damage your model in areas. So there's like this big game that you have to play with supporting the model correctly so it prints and doesn't have failure, because if you don't support it correctly, then you will have failure on your models, and that's kind of devastating. You wait hours and hours only to find out that your model failed. So that's a little disheartening, but as you work through that and you get good prints, that's super exciting, and it's super rewarding to see your thing that you just had in your mind and you sculpted this thing in the computer, and then here it is and it's tangible and you can put it in your hand and you can touch it. So that's really cool, and it's really rewarding. What I have here, this setup, I'm going to try to get a better setup for what I have for this camera right now. This is actually a webcam, so it's not the highest quality, and what you're going to see here, me holding things up in front of the camera, it's going to be super small, and I'm just going to probably be in the corner of the screen. But when this video is done, I will splice in some different pictures of things, but I'll just tell you about my thinking about this project. So what I did was I went through with this. I'm gonna show you an earlier version of this model. Let me just go ahead and open this real quick. And let me show you this one. And I've got all the different pieces that I took and I printed out. And I did this at a really small scale. So as this loads up, if I just show you inside the camera here, If you can see this with this head that I've got here, this is the size of the head inside of a finger here. And then this is the torso that we've got with the arm and everything. And so printed it out really small. I wanted to try to print small and print quickly and try to figure out all the different problems that I might have with this. So let me just turn on the parts here and I can cycle through this. I'll show you the head. So what I did was split the head off like this, and we've got some structures on here that are supposed to make it very easy for you to be able to pop these parts off, socket them into the rest of the body. Now the problem is, whenever you put support structures on here, you can have residue from printing that you got to clean up and things like that. And the tolerances, I wish the tolerances are a little bit better. You can have problems where the model still just doesn't fit together all that well. So my current thinking is I would use this machine to prototype to the best of my ability and try to figure out problems with what is going on with the model. And then after I've got all this kind of figured out, if I would really want to, I'm probably going to have to find a different company. I know there's a company out there called Onage, and they do amazing quality prints. I'm guessing I'm probably going to have to send the model off to some company, and they're going to produce these really high quality pieces for me. So this is my plan for the torso. Part of the problem is at the larger scale that I wanted to print this at, there's a volume that you're able to print on the Yellow Goo Mars, and it wasn't able to fit within that volume. So I was trying to figure out how could I logically take this model and break it apart into different pieces. So one of the first things that I did was I took the torso and I split it into these different pieces that you can see here, like this. And inside a ZBrush, if I turn the solo off here, you can see how everything sockets together very nicely. And you can see that there's like very little seams in here and things like that. And so like in the computer it looks great, and it looks like it would turn out awesome, right? The problem is I can try to hold these things up and put this in front of the screen, but again I can just take some pictures later and kind of show you guys this a little bit better. But as these parts come together, there is some warping that happens sometimes, so it doesn't really join together as great as I would like it to. In fact, there's quite a bit of a gap in these parts, and I'm just not super happy with it. So I definitely went through and I changed the design of the torso, and I just combined those pieces together. And let me just run through. I'm just going to still put this on here, and I'll show you the parts for the arms. The other thing that I did that just did not work out all that well is I printed out the arms, and then I printed out the hands separately like this. And I thought it'd be really clever to be able to swap out hands and do different poses for hands, and I still think that's a good idea. It's just at the scale that I printed out, let me see if I can find one of the better hands. You can see how small this hand actually is, right here like that. And so the parts are just too delicate, and the tolerances that it needed to socket into the arm that I had just had some issues. It could actually work, so it did work on this arm, and I'm able to get the hand in there, but it feels really brittle at this scale, and feels super like I'm definitely gonna break the model if I handle it too harshly, right? The other thing at this scale is I printed it out in the support structures that I had. I've been watching a lot of videos by a guy named 3D Printing Pro, and he's got support structures that, like, calls it insane support structures, and it's supposed to be really good settings for getting as little damage as possible on the model. Now that guy's really good, and he's got a lot of luck with his settings. I'm just probably not as patient as he is, and I'm not placing everything by hand the way that he is and trying to do auto supports. So with those support structures I've had a lot of failures, and right now I'm just like I've got so much other stuff going on that making support structures the best that they possibly can be is probably not the top thing on my priority. So I'm just going back to like what Elegoo has set for their standard support structures and just using that to get parts out as quickly as possible. So after I learned a few things from this set, I printed up twice the size of this after that. So I got the feet, the bottoms of the legs, and the tops. And again, I thought maybe we could do something different with swapping out feet. I don't think that's quite as good as probably swapping out hands. One thing that I did do and kind of figure out is that these parts, as they come together, there's a lot of strain on this part of the legs right in through here, so it's in my best interest to keep all this stuff together, and that's something that I've kind of learned through this latest model. And I'll show you this model here, and I'll try to show you like kind of the scale that this thing is right in through here. Now he might kind of cut out, I'm doing a green screen behind me and the creature that I've actually made is green. The first thing that I actually did was just a head and printed out a head for this, and so it was a completely different creature, and I really like the head, and so I thought it'd be cool just to make the entire body. But one of the things that I learned even from printing at this scale, this thing's being held together with Super Sculpey, and then I made a base that you can see for it, and I made that out of Magic Sculpt, and that worked rather well. The problem is there was a lot of kind of tension on this part of the legs, and it actually snapped off. Because another thing that I did with this project that wasn't so great, I'm used to working with Super Sculpey, and I had some seams that I wanted to clean up, and I used Super Sculpey, and everything looked really good, and I was trying to bake it in my home oven. Don't know how safe it is to take resin that's been printed and put it in an oven, but I did it, so maybe learn from my mistakes. And there's probably some people shouting in the comments maybe about that, I don't know. Yeah, so another lesson that I learned that you could avoid, and I'm not going to avoid in the future, is whenever I baked this in the oven, the layer lines for actually building this resin, they started to come apart and they started to split apart. So for this design of this character, and because of the stage of where I'm at, I still thought it was kind of cool and not that big of a deal, but definitely something I'm going to avoid in the future. So I think if I'm ever going to join things together, I'm going to have to use something like Magic Sculpt. And the only thing that I like about the Super Sculpey is it doesn't have a drying time, so you can have a lot of time to work on whatever it is that you're working on. With something like Magic Sculpt or some other kind of putty that's going to dry pretty quickly, you're going to have a working time with it, and you're going to have to make sure that you can get everything made in a correct amount of time for that, right? And so the other thing that I was going to talk to you about is as I was making these things and I want to paint them, the other thing that I learned about this material using the resins to make the 3D models with, I don't think this is just strictly a problem with the water washable. So I went out and bought this brand Golden, and it's a high flow acrylics, and just using an airbrush. I had a Pache VL. I used to airbrush t-shirts a long time ago, so I know how to work an airbrush, and so I was trying to use an airbrush, digging that out. So I'm picking up some old skill sets that I've had before in the past. Like I said, I think this is just kind of a fun way to bring a lot of different tools and techniques that I've learned over the years and bring it all together and just have fun and creating, right? So back to the problem. The problem is that with these resins, after you paint these, you got to be very careful. If you touch the model, the paint can just slide right off the model very easily. So I know I need to use a primer, and I'm looking into finding out what the best kind of primers would be to be using for these projects. I don't know exactly yet. I've got something on order, and I'll have to report back on what I find on that. But what I am a little concerned about, I want to make sure whatever primer I have, I want to run that through the airbrush and make sure it's very fine, because the surface quality of what we're printing here the tolerances of it are so low that if I take something from a spray can and I spray the model, I could end up ruining some of the detail or just kind of covering it up completely. Now that might be a good thing if you're having some printing problems, something like that, right? But if you don't have printing problems, then you want to keep the detail as pristine as you possibly can in that process, right? And so just like as I'm talking, it kind of came to me, the primer that I ordered was a Badger primer. So again, I'm gonna have to try that. I'll have to maybe take some pictures again of this. I touched the back of the arm and maybe his back, and I actually was able to fix that and incorporate that into the paint job, and I thought that was kind of cool. It was just a little bit later I had an issue with the model where the legs broke off because turning the model to take some pictures, and he fell off the stand just because I didn't glue him to the stand, and then one of his legs broke off, and then just a complete disaster with Super Sculpey sticking to the fingers and paint and everything. So I wouldn't consider this prototype that I've made, it's not ruined. It's kind of it's cool. I still like it. The problem is I've definitely damaged it, and I think I've learned everything I need to learn from that prototype and that particular stage that I've got. And so yeah, I'll just leave it as a learning experience for all the different things that I've kind of gone through and things to kind of avoid. And so I don't mind sharing some of the things that I've kind of messed up on through this process, because it's just a learning process for me and I want to grow and get better. And so if I can share that with you and you could avoid some of the mistakes, that's cool. So my goal with this thing is to kind of fix a few of the mistakes, obviously, that I've made. I'm planning on printing this thing twice the size of what this thing finally is right here. So I've got to find some creative ways of splitting apart the chest and making sure I can do that so I can get that apart. So I'm just going to go ahead and open up the latest scene file that I have, and I can kind of show you that. And so this is still how I'm kind of splitting the model apart. I won't split the hands apart. I've done some more sculpting on the hand, kind of added this little bit to the goiter down here, added some little more horns on here. One thing that I know that I did, I kind of lengthened the legs just a little bit. I'm adding more to the bottom of the feet and making that a bit flat in through there, so I can make sure that this creature stands on his own. The one that I had before was standing on its own, but it was very, very dicey, so I'm trying to just make sure that the character can be balanced all by itself and doesn't need any additional help for that. I kind of the legs before were pretty straight on, so I kind of rotated those out just a little bit like this, and I thinned up the shoulder. So I'm just doing some small anatomical things I just changed about it that I wasn't super happy about, but I think this is at a pretty good stage. So the next thing that I got to do to get this model ready is what I'm using here inside of ZBrush is they're called Polygroups. And so with Polygroups, it's this really easy way for you to kind of just hold down Control and Shift, and then you click on that, and you can show and hide parts. But what I can do with that, after I've got that, is I can split these models off into their own separate models, and then I can close the backs of these off. And you saw with the other model, what I was able to do is make these shapes and these keys that will go into other shapes, and I can do this as a negative shape into like the chest and things like that. So I can make it really easy to make sure that the model keys into itself. Another thing that I'm going to try doing whenever I do my negative shapes and then key that out into the other shapes, I'm using this inflate on that. So I was just inflating very little, and the tolerances for this for when it prints, I think I need to inflate that a little bit more and make the parts have a bigger gap in between them, because I think there's some shrinkage on the parts and things like that that are happening whenever the printing happens and it forms the final model on there. So these are all things that I'm working on currently, and gonna do another round of tests of printing and pull that all together. And when I'm done with that, then I'll continue and keep showing you the different progress that is going on with this model.